This video goes over common mistakes on RIP 8. Common mistake number 1 on problem 1, people not recognizing that I times I is I squared. A lot of people just put I. And then also I squared is -1. Therefore, negative 14I squared becomes negative 14 times -1, which is positive 14. So that was a common mistake. A lot of people did not change this to 14. Also, a lot of people left it in terms of I in their answer. When we simplify something that's in complex numbers, we don't want to keep I squareds. We want to make sure that our answer just has real parts and imaginary parts, and then I squared gets simplified. Problem 2, you probably want to move everything to one side. The easiest way to do it is probably to use the quadratic formula, but you also could complete the square. And actually, that's probably about the same level of difficulty, but a lot of people that were completing the square, when they took a square root, they did not simplify the square root of 9/4. So the square root of 9/4 is 3/2. Also notice that it is the square root of -9/4, which means that it would be 3/2I. So this would end up having the same answer. Now, as this was happening, a lot of people made mistakes with regard to simplifying. So the square root of -144 is 12I. You cannot take the 144 and divide it by 8 to get 18. That's not something you can do in this problem because the 144 is inside of a root and the 8 is not. So since one of them's inside of a root and the other one's not, you cannot divide them out. Whereas if it was the square root of 144 over 8 and both of them were inside of a square root, that would be okay. But you can't do that in this particular problem. So this is not 2 plus or minus root -18. Also, a lot of people made their answer some sort of factoring thing where it's written in intercept form. This is not the answer to the question. The question is asking us to solve. So if we are to solve, we have to get x equals something. X equals something. We do not have something written in factored form as our final answer. So make sure that we are answering the question that they are asking. Problem 3, most common mistakes were getting 4 equals -20 times a, and then dividing by -20 and getting 5 or -5. This is not true because when you divide, it's 4 divided by -20, which is -1/5. So we have to be careful when it comes to that. Also, you are allowed to leave it in intercept form. Number 4, write the equation of a quadratic with a vertex and a y-intercept. Write it in vertex form first. Substitute in 0, 6. Some people did not substitute in 0 for x and 6 for y. And then solve. Once again, several people got 49/3. That's not the correct answer in this problem for A. And then once you get A, you have to put it in and not circle A as the answer. Your answer is an equation. So you have to have an equation which includes a y and an x. Letter B. There are 2 different ways that you can acceptably do this. You can substitute 5 in for y and then solve for x. So when you solve, you subtract 3 and you get 2 equals 3/49 times x minus 7 squared. Then you do some multiplying, get 98/3, take the square root. It would be the square root of 98/3. All of that would be on the inside of the square root. Some people had the 3 not under the square root. That's not correct in this case. And then you get 2 answers. one of which is between 11 and 13, because that's what we were looking for. Another way to solve this correctly would be to plug in 11 for x and 13 for x. Notice that now this person did not round to 3 decimal places like you are supposed to, but in this case, what ended up happening is this person substituted in 11 and 13 for x, found that it crosses at 11, sometime between 11 and 13. It does cross 5 because it goes from 3.98 to 6.2. It gets past 5 somewhere in this interval. Now, the rounding wasn't good, but that was an acceptable way of doing it. And I think it's kind of important for us to understand, because this is probably the 5th or 6th time that I've written on some people's papers, that you must round to 3 decimal places at the end of a problem. So lots of people, when they were getting this, were just writing 12.7. That is just not what we are asking you to do. Please round to 3 decimal places at the end of a problem if it is a calculator part of a problem. So those were the 2 ways to do part B. Then finally, number 5, write the equation in standard form. You can get x equals 3 minus 7i. That also means 3 plus 7i must be a solution because complex numbers go in pairs. So you can write it in intercept form, and then notice that this is really the difference of 2 squares and simplify that quicker. Or you can do the distributive property on all of this, have 9 things and cancel things out. A lot of people made mistakes leaving this in terms of I, getting 9 minus 49, because they had some mistakes with the I squareds and stuff. So you have to be careful with that. Final thing that we have to make sure that we're aware of is we have to read the question. So it says to do the discriminant part without calculations. What do we know about the discriminant? We know the discriminant without calculation is less than 0. And a lot of people made comments like, because the discriminant is less than 0, then we have imaginary solutions. Well, we knew there were imaginary solutions before the problem was done, which means we should probably write the answer as, because we have imaginary solutions, because we have no real x-intercepts, because there are complex numbers as the answer, there's no possible way that I'm going to get a positive or a 0 for the discriminant. So that's something to keep in mind as you're doing that. Also, notice this person did all of the distributing, so that's something that you can take note of. So we have to be aware of what the question is actually asking for. So if it's asking for how do you know, or what do you know about the discriminant, you have to say why you know it. You cannot say something to the effect of the discriminant is 0 because, or I'm sorry, you can't say something to the effect of because the discriminant is 0, we know there are no imaginary solutions. We actually knew there were no imaginary solutions before we knew the discriminant was 0. Or we knew there were imaginary solutions before we knew anything about the discriminant. So we have to get the order of this right. And then the other thing that you may want to be aware of when you're doing a problem like this is that your answer in standard form should have y equals stuff. A lot of people were writing their answer as negative 58 equals x squared minus 6x plus y, or minus y, or something like that. And that's not standard form. It's also important to note that this is something that we should know from the very beginning of the problem. Once we see that we have 3 minus 7i, we know that the solutions are complex. They are non-real. So that automatically means the discriminant is less than 0. And some people were calculating things and getting a discriminant to be greater than 0 and then saying there are 2 real answers. Well, we know that there aren't 2 real answers because we know that the answers are non-real answers from the beginning of the problem. And that's kind of what this question was getting us, or getting at. What do we know about the discriminant? If we see that we have a non-real answer before it starts, that's something that we should automatically know. The discriminant is less than 0 because we already know that we have imaginary solutions.